talk about LFO1 and actually LFO2. So here's what we're going to do. It's not always my favorite thing to do because I just can't stand pitch variation in some ways. But I'm going to connect LFO1 to the global pitch of the synthesizer so that we can hear the different wave shapes and what is happening to them as we're using them. Okay, here's what we're going to do. The default in the mods section, which we haven't talked anything about this patch panel yet, so preview, I guess. The mods, the first channel is pitch global, so it'll be really easy to just connect LFO1 to the pitch and turn it all the way up. All right. So now, well, actually, let's turn it down first. Okay. I'm just using a sawtooth wave as per usual, and we just turn it up. So you can hear there is quite a range to the LFO. You can hear the sine wave there, and of course it's pretty extreme. This will give you a better sense of the shape of the wave without being so extreme in frequency. We also have a triangle wave, very similar to the sine wave kind of when you're listening to it. A square wave, which of course the amount of the modulation that you apply will give you the up and down section of the square wave. So if we give it a lot, it goes from a low note to a very high note. Okay, sawtooth wave, ramp wave, sample and hold. I'm just going to keep that going until it repeats. I'm just joking. It wouldn't repeat. That's the joke. Great, Mark. Yeah. Your comedy career is dead. Okay. In addition to sample and hold, there is also lagged sample and hold. Of course, lagged sample and hold is one of my favorites of all time, and I'll explain that in just a moment because we'll get to something that will demonstrate why. Okay, so lagged sample and hold obviously is a sample and hold where the note changes, the voltages as they change from one voltage to another don't do so immediately. There is a variance of time. Okay, there is one difference between LFO1 and LFO2, but we'll talk about that. Okay, so of course you do have a rate here, which has quite a breadth of weight. Let's get something that maybe indicates change a little bit more. Suffice it to say that it has a very low rate. And the rate goes up into the audio range where it becomes an audible frequency. So, and sample and hold, when you speed it up fast enough and use it to a great enough degree, you get kind of a random, almost noise type sound. If you use that as a modulation to something that isn't frequency, you'll get something akin to noise. So you have more opportunities to have noise modulation in a variety of places. In this, we also have sync. So when you press sync, of course, right now the LFO is syncing to the sequencer. Of course, we're not using the sequencer, so we can't really tell that's happening. But I guarantee that it is, because I just turned up the rate on the sequencer, and the speed of the LFO went up as well. But here's the important thing to remember about the sync is this: if you hold the sync button down, you get binary, triplet, and dotted rhythms. So you get to choose how the LFO syncs with the sequencer. Because that's why you would have LFO sync, is so that it is synced with the arpeggiator or the sequencer. So let's slow this down. Also, you just saw like the rate. Once we're in sync mode, the rate gives you what type of note you're talking about. You have whole note, half note, quarter note, eighth note, 16th note, and 32nd note. The other thing though, by pressing this, we could go into triplet. Here, let's do this in sequence so you can hear the differences. So basically, you can get the LFO to sync with the sequencer in a duple manner, a triple manner, or a dotted manner at the note that you decide through setting the rate to at the note value that you decide set with the rate knob. So that has it pretty much covered. You can sync it to any type of tempo in any sort of rhythmic way, which is really cool. Okay, so far we have just been hearing the LFO in the mono mode, which means one LFO is applied to all the notes that are playing and that just means that one, it's kind of, I don't want to say paraphonic because that'll totally freak you out, but basically it is one LFO applied to all of the different notes that are playing. Let's make it a little more evident here. We can hear that sine wave being equally applied to all of the different notes. Now, what we can also do is move on to poly. Now each individual note has their own LFO, and that LFO is free running. It's not synchronized to anything, and it's entirely possible that it is going at its own kind of frequency. It's still being set by the rate, but it is no longer exactly in line to the degree that it was when it was mono and it was one LFO. There are multiple LFOs, and they're all kind of doing their own thing, which makes a wider sound. We also have the setting Retrigger, which means that each time you press a note, the LFO starts over again. And in the Retrigger mode, it is polyphonic LFO. So all of the different LFOs that will play when you play notes will all start at the same point. Of course, there's no guarantee that they will stay in sync with each other because they're all free running, but they all at least start at the same time. Of course, if you don't play them all at the same time, they start at the point their notes starts. So each individual LFO starts at 0 at the point at which the note that it is connected to starts. So then you can make them not be in sync with each other. Those are all in sync. Now they're all crazy. That same thing can be done with poly, but in poly, they're not all starting at 0. So you can force them to not be in sync with each other using Retrigger, which forces them to start all at 0 at the point their note starts, which is different. Okay, this is all really cool. This is a very powerful LFO. The last thing, well, it's not the last thing. Okay, so there's also phase, which you can force your LFO out of the cycle it is currently in and readjust it in instances where you have two different LFOs playing and they're in sync with each other. You can force them out of sync with each other by setting the phase on LFO1 to something different, which is cool. One of the things I was going to point out earlier when I was raving about how great lagged sample and hold is, okay. So that is lagged sample and hold. Now, one of the things that I always like to tell people is the great sound of analog is that vintage analog just didn't stay in tune. And it wasn't that it would drift out of tune. It was that each individual oscillator had kind of its own tuning and it didn't stick to its own tuning for very long, which is to say it did drift out of tune over time, but it was also drifting in and out of tune almost sometimes by cycle. So if you want to damage the delightful stability of this synthesizer, here's how you make your pitch sound vintage, by making it vary. And here's the best way to do that. You go to your lagged sample and hold. Here, we're going to leave it at a high rate and in a big amount so you can hear what's happening. So basically, you're introducing something that varies pitch over time in a random way. And if you switch it to polyphonic, you can hear that all of the different notes, they all have their own random, not synced variations in pitch, which is awesome. So then let's take this and slow it down. I don't know what's the best rate for that. And then we're going to decrease the amount almost to nothing. You can hear, if you listen, you can hear the different notes going out of tune with each other. And each of them has their own thing going on. So you have a really broad, warm sound that results. This is only, a sawtooth here, and each of these different notes is varying on its own. It just makes for a lot of natural chorusing. And then, of course, if you add in VCO2 and make it out of tune too, you get just the biggest, warmest thing. Now, theoretically, if I was really obnoxious, I would separate out the fact that right now we're globally controlling all pitch with this lagged sample and hold per note. If I was going to be obnoxious, I would go in and I would make it so that the individual pitch controls for oscillators 1 and 2 were different. Then I would apply LFO1 to oscillator 1, LFO2 to oscillator 2, set them both to the varying, the lagged sample and hold, set them both to poly, and set them at different rates. And you just get this even more warm, huge, fat, the hugest, most intense of warm, big, fat polyphonic sound is possible. I'm sure I'll probably do it at some time. Maybe I'll do it specifically when I do the patch panel so that you can hear just how giant you can make this. And that's, and then if you throw in a filter and like the second filter and use noise to distort it, throw in some hiss from your noise generator, and you have guaranteed 100% vintage analog polysynth, better than some of the vintage analog polysynths. It's just delicious. It's out of control. Okay. So one other thing I need to talk about is there is a different knob in LFO2. So I was lying earlier. Let us listen to that. I'm going to turn LFO1 off, go to LFO2, have it control this. Now, if you're a person who wants like vibrato to fade in, your fade in knob's going to be your buddy. I'm going to turn down the... Okay, so there's your more pitch variation. If you have the fade in, this LFO will come in over time. Ooh, and what happens if we have it on Poly Retrig? Here, let's turn it down so we can hear this. Each of the fade-in is for each of the individual LFOs. I'm assuming there are 6, probably not 12, but at least 6 LFOs. And so if you have fade-in and then you stagger the entrances of those 6 LFOs, they're going to come in at different points, which is really cool. So this is all insanely, madly powerful. And those are LFO1 and LFO2 on the Arturia PolyBrute.